The square of KTH-9 throbbed with noise, the kind that pressed into the ears until it became part of the skull. Neon signs sputtered in fractured light, half their letters missing, buzzing against the constant drizzle that dripped from rusted. Pipes above. Oil floated in the puddles, smearing rainbow streaks across black water. Vendors shouted prices that shifted by the minute. Scavengers leaned on carts, patched with scrap metal, eyes sharp for weakness. Somewhere deeper in the alleys, a generator coughed, rattling against concrete. The whole colony smelled of damp stone, frying grease, and sewage that had no place else to run. At the center of the square, where the crowd thickened, laughter rose. Not the kind born of humor, but the heavy, guttural kind that dragged attention and fed on cruelty. A woman knelt in the mud, her knees sunk deep into water the color of rust. Ariel's silver hair, once ceremonial, clung to her face in ropes streaked with filth. The fabric of her wrap hung in strips from her shoulders, barely covering her. Her skin violet, bruised and thin from hunger shivered in the rain. Her hands pressed into the slime as her master, a thick-necked man with a scar carved across. His jaw tossed scraps down at her feet. "Eat," he barked, voice thick with mockery. "Show them what you are." The scraps landed in the mud, half of them sinking into the puddle, grease swirling in filthy water. Ariel's stomach twisted painfully, a hollow ache that had been gnawing at her for days. Every nerve screamed too. Crawl forward, to snatch whatever she could before the water soaked it beyond use. But her chest heaved, breath catching as humiliation pressed harder than hunger. She froze, trembling, eyes locked on the dirt. She thought if she ate, she would lose what little was left of herself. If she refused, her body would break soon enough. The men around her laughed louder. Some leaned forward to get a better view. A few smirked, chewing their skewers of fried meat, oil dripping down their wrists. Others just stared with that hollow look that said cruelty had become entertainment. Ariel's throat burned as her master shoved her shoulder, forcing her face closer to the mud. "On your hands," he said, "like the animal you are." She swallowed against the rising bile in her throat. Her hands shook, splaying in the dirt. She hated the movement, hated her body for betraying her will. Still, her stomach tightened with need, her vision blurring at the smell of grease. Her chest whispered with a silent scream, "Don't give him this. Don't let him have it." The laughter thickened, rising around her like smoke. Then it broke. A new sound cut through the noise boots splashing steady in the water. A rhythm, too. Calm to belong in this place. The crowd shifted as a man pushed closer. Mid-30s, broad-shouldered, his dark hair salted with gray at the edges. He wore a plain shirt tucked into utility trousers, boots worn from marsh that hadn't ended. When the war did. A Federation band gleamed faintly on his wrist, simple, unremoved. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't carry himself like a man spoiling for a fight. He walked like someone who had measured the space already and chosen where to stand. Kelvin. Valen stopped in front of her, boots inches from her hands, rain dripping off his jawline. Ariel froze, expecting another order, another hand, another shove to force her face into the dirt. Her master sneered, spitting to the side. "Move on, stranger. She's mine." Kelvin didn't look at him. He crouched so his eyes leveled with hers, green and sharp, unwavering. His voice came low, even, steady enough to slice through the jeers around them. "You don't eat from the ground." He extended his hand, palm open, not forcing, not pulling closer. An invitation, not a command. Ariel stared at it, her body rigid. Her first thought was that it was a trick. Her second was that if she touched him, she'd belong to him too. But the way he held it still, patient, waiting made her hesitate. Her master growled, fists curling, but the laughter of the crowd faltered. Silence seeped in at the edges. curiosity stronger than cruelty. Ariel's breath shivered. She looked at her mud-streaked fingers, then at his hand, rough and scarred, steady as stone. She hated herself for it, hated the fragility in her chest, but her arm lifted, slow, trembling, as if each inch of movement defied years of submission. Her fingers slid into his. His grip closed just enough to give her weight, to hold her steady. He rose, lifting her from the mud. Her knees scraped raw against the stone as she stood, unsteady, tripping, but upright. The crowd murmured. Her master's face darkened, but Kelvin didn't give him a glance. His focus stayed on her, his voice firm enough to leave no cracks. "Stand," he said. And for the first time in years she did. Rain tapped softly against the fractured awnings, sliding down rusted edges before dripping into the square. The moment Ariel's body lifted from the mud, the market seemed to hold its breath. Men who had laughed a heartbeat ago shifted uneasily, their grins breaking. The master's sneer deepened, his scar pulling tight across his jaw. He took a step forward, fists tightening, shoulders squared, his voice rising with a growl meant to reclaim control. "She belongs to me." Kelvin still didn't look at him. His focus never left Ariel, whose trembling hands clutched the crate. He had guided her toward. Her knees quivered under the strain of standing after so long pressed down. She tried to keep herself upright, her chest heaving, golden eyes flickering between the stranger's calm and her master's rage. Fear pressed against her throat, and she waited for the blow that always came. But at DIDN single quotes T. Kelvin reached into his pocket, unfolded a cloth with neat precision, and set it across the crate. The motion was unhurried, deliberate, the movements of a man used to controlling chaos. He lifted the filthy plate her master had tossed and carried it away, placing credits onto the counter of a nearby stall. The vendor, who had watched with wide eyes, moved quickly, ladling broth and noodles into a fresh bowl. Kelvin returned and set the steaming meal into Ariel's lap, crouching again so his green eyes met hers. His voice, steady and quiet, cut through her panic. "Eat." Ariel froze, her breath short and shallow. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'm not allowed. You are now." The smell of broth reached her, rich and hot, twisting her stomach with a sharp ache. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the spoon. She nearly dropped it, her hand shaking so badly she felt humiliation burn her skin. Kelvin's rough fingers steadied her wrist, firm and brief, before pulling away. She stared at the broth, at the steam rising, then finally raised the spoon to her lips. The first taste hit her tongue, heat spreading down her chest, settling in her stomach like a forgotten memory. Tears pressed behind her eyes, unbidden, almost shameful. She swallowed hard and took another spoonful. Her master's voice broke across the square, sharp with fury. "She's mine." This time Kelvin rose to his full height. His expression didn't shift. His voice stayed calm, carrying more weight for its lack of volume. Not anymore. The words fell like iron into the silence. The square didn't erupt into the fight the master had expected. No one moved to help him. The eyes of the crowd pressed against him instead, and in that silence he felt something heavier than fists, the weight of lost authority. He spat into the mud, muttered curses, and turned his back, disappearing into the restless shuffle of the market. Ariel sat rigid on the crate, spoon clutched in her hand, struggling to breathe. Disbelief twisted with dread in her chest, but beneath, it stirred something she hadn't felt in years' relief. The stranger didn't gloat, didn't sneer, didn't claim. He simply stood nearby, boots planted firm, a presence that anchored the space. She finished the broth slowly, spoon clinking against the bowl. Each mouthful felt stolen, unreal. When she was done, Kelvin took the bowl without a word, returned. it to the stall with exact credits, and motioned gently for her to rise. She wavered, weak, unsure if her legs would hold. Her golden eyes flicked toward him, searching for command, direction. He extended his hand again, calm and patient. For a moment she wanted to recoil, to whisper that she couldn't trust him, and then all he ever took. But her fingers slid into his palm anyway. His grip closed warm and steady, lifting her onto her feet. The noise of the market rose again, dice clattering in the corner, voices bartering over scraps. The spectacle was forgotten in minutes, swallowed by neon and rain. But for Ariel, the ground still felt raw beneath her knees, and the stranger's hand still held her steady. Kelvin led her through the narrow alleys at a measured pace. His stride matched to hers. Pipes rattled above, dripping water into barrels, sparks snapping from exposed wires. She followed, confusion and fear twisting every thought. Why had he stepped in? Why had he risked her master's wrath? No one gave without price. No one helped without demand. The stranger finally stopped at a plain metal door, its paint long stripped by rain. He keyed in a sequence and pushed it open, gesturing for her to enter. She hesitated on the threshold, heart hammering, ready to go. Turn and run. His voice came even, quiet, final. It's clean, safer than the street. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ariel stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a heavy metallic thud that muffled the noise of the alleys outside. The sudden quiet pressed against Ariel's ears, so different from the clamor of the square that her body tensed in expectation of some hidden danger. She lingered just inside, her damp silver hair sticking to her face, fingers twisting the shredded edge of her wrap. The room was small, bare, and utilitarian. A single cot lined one wall, its blanket folded with military precision. Steel table sat beneath a lamp that buzzed faintly, light cooling on stacked shelves of ration packs, bandages, and neatly aligned tools. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and canvas. It wasn't a home. It was quarters stripped down to necessity, belonging to someone who lived by order and habit. Kelvin dropped his satchel onto the table, unfastened his wristband long enough to wipe the condensation off its surface, and refitted it with practiced ease. His movements carried no hesitation, no wasted effort. When he finally turned toward her, his gaze was steady but unreadable. "It's safe here," he said. "For tonight, you stay." She swallowed hard. Her throat ached from disuse, but the words slipped out before she could stop them. Why? Why me? His jaw flexed once, as if he weighed how much of an answer she deserved. "Because you shouldn't be out there tonight." It wasn't what she expected. No explanation of ownership, no bargain, no demand. Just a fact. That alone unsettled her more than any threat might have. She glanced toward the cot. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees beside it, head bowed, waiting for the command that would follow. Her body had learned the motion too well, instinct tightening her muscles before her mind caught up. Kelvin's boots scraped softly against the floor as he crossed the room. He crouched in front of her, his green eyes sharp, his voice quieter now, but edged with finality. "Not here. Not in this room." His hand tilted her chin upward until her golden eyes met his. "You don't kneel. You sit at the table beside me." Her chest tightened. Shame burned her skin. Slowly, as if breaking chains one link at a time, she pushed herself to her feet. She moved stiffly to the chair and lowered herself onto it. The steel felt cold under her legs, the position strange, but her pulse quickened with the strangeness of the gesture. Sitting at a table, as an equal it felt. Unreal. Kelvin busied himself with motion. He pulled a ration pack from the shelf, set water to heat, folded the cloth he had carried from the square, laying it aside with precise lines. He didn't watch her as he worked, but his calm carried weight. Ariel sat rigid, her hands tight. In her lap, every breath caught between fear and disbelief. She wanted to ask what he would demand. She wanted to whisper that she wasn't worth the risk. But her voice betrayed her instead. "Do I stay here for now?" "Until you're steady," he answered. Her hands tightened. Fear still pressed sharp in her chest, but beneath it flickered something she barely recognized: possibility. The kettle whistled softly. Kelvin poured hot water into a cup and set it in front of her. "Drink." Steam rose against her face, fogging her vision for a moment. She wrapped her hands around the cup, holding its warmth as if it might vanish. She sipped slowly, breath catching as heat spread into her stomach. Kelvin took the seat across from her. Silence settled, not harsh, but firm. He didn't interrogate her, didn't demand explanations, didn't call her property. He simply studied her the way a medic might study a patient, measuring the tremor in her hands, the hollowness in her cheeks, the clarity in her gaze. Finally, she whispered, "My name is Ariel." He gave a short nod. "Kelvin." The sound of the. His name sat heavy between them, grounding her more than she expected. She searched his face for cracks, some sign of the trap she still feared, but found only that unshaken calm. It unsettled her more than rage would have. That night she curled on the cot, clutching the blanket like armor. Kelvin remained in the chair, boots planted, arms loose, eyes fixed on the door instead of her. The colony groaned around them, pipes rattling in the walls, neon bleeding dimly through the blinds. Her thoughts circled the same questions until exhaustion dragged her down. Would he change tomorrow? Would he demand what all men eventually demanded? Or had she stepped into something she had long forgotten, shelter not tied to chains? Kelvin stayed awake longer, watching the door. He hadn't meant to bring anyone into his space, but the moment he lifted her from the mud, the choice had been made. And choices, he knew from the war, couldn't be walked back. Morning crept into the room through broken blinds, a pale blue glow cutting across the steel table and the stacked shelves. The storm outside had eased, leaving the air heavy with the sour smell of wet concrete. Ariel stirred on the cot, clutching the blanket until her body remembered where she was. For one fragile heartbeat, she almost believed she had dreamed the night before. Then she saw Kelvin seated in the chair, boots still on, posture rigid but calm, eyes not on her but on the door. He had not slept. Her chest tightened with panic. She folded the blanket quickly and set it aside, her knees hitting the floor in a movement so ingrained she didn't even think. Head bowed, hands pressed against the concrete, she braced for his voice, for the command that would come. Instead came a quiet, steady cut through the silence. "Stand up." She froze. Her muscles screamed to stay down. Slowly she lifted her head. His gaze met hers, sharp and steady. "Not here. Not ever again." Confusion flushed through her chest. Her throat felt tight. "I don't know what else to do." "You learn," he said simply. He rose and moved to the shelf, pulling down a ration pack and a tin cup. He set them on the table and nodded. "At the chair. Sit." Her legs shook, but she obeyed, lowering herself into the chair with awkward stiffness. The steel was cold beneath her again, but this time she forced herself to stay. Kelvin tore the ration open with precise movements, poured water into the heating coil, stirred, and set the food in front of her without fanfare. "Eat." She hesitated. The memory of scraps in the mud pressed hard against her chest. Her hands shook as she lifted the spoon. He didn't watch her mouth, only her hands, the way they trembled, the way she kept glancing down as if waiting for permission. His jaw flexed once. "What did he call you when no one was listening?" Her throat closed, the answer lodged like glass. "Animal. Half-breed. property when he was sober? Kelvin's voice came flat. And what do you call yourself? She swallowed, eyes stinging. Ariel. Say it again. Her lips parted, voice cracking. Ariel. Good, he said, and leaned back. When she finished eating, he set a folded bundle on the table-plain shirt, rough shorts, clean enough to smell faintly of soap. Change. He turned his back deliberately, eyes on the door like a sentry. She stared at the clothes, heart hammering. It had been years since anyone cared whether she was covered, whether fabric was hers, and not just rags draped to humiliate her. She fumbled with the knots of her torn wrap, clumsy with nerves, and slipped into the oversized shirt and shorts. The fabric fell to mid-thigh, sleeves rolled at the elbows. It wasn't ceremonial. It wasn't fine. But it was whole. Done, she whispered. He turned. His eyes swept her once, quick, controlled. Something flickered in them, an honest attraction, but then locked down behind restraint. The look made her stomach tighten with heat and fear all at once. He nodded once. Better? You'll need boots later. Her hands brushed the fabric at her waist. She whispered, I can work for them. You can decide later how to trade, he said. First, strength. He keyed the door sequence and motioned for her to follow. Her pulse quickened with dread, but she obeyed. The streets outside still stank of rust and grease. Vendors shouted prices, dice clattered. The colony throbbed with its usual hunger. But this time she walked beside him. His stride slowed, steady, measured so hers could match Dot. Every step felt like a weight pressing against her chest. People stared. Some whispered. A few smirked. She heard one voice cut through the noise. Should have stayed on her knees. Her body flinched, her legs threatening to buckle. Kelvin's hand brushed against the small of her back, steady, not pushing. His voice was low, meant only for her. Eyes forward. You don't owe them anything. Her breath shivered, but she nodded. Step by step, she kept walking. They stopped at a food stall. The vendor froze, recognition flashing across his face. Kelvin set credits down and said, 2 balls. His tone left no room for refusal. The vendor obeyed quickly, ladling broth and noodles. Ariel stood stiff at Kelvin's side, every muscle tight. Her knees itched with the ghost of bruises. The memory of mud pressed heavy on her chest. Fear told her she couldn't sit. Fear told her they were waiting to laugh, to shove her down again. Kelvin took his bowl, sat calmly on the wet metal chair, and looked at her. His voice was even final. Eat here, beside me. Her chest clenched. She gripped the bowl until her knuckles went white. The chair loomed before her, not just a seat, but a battle. She took one step, then another, and lowered herself into it. The whispers behind her sharpened, but none dared loud enough to challenge. The human sitting solid at her side. Her knees begged to fold, her eyes begged to drop, but she forced the spoon to her lips. The broth scalded her tongue, but she swallowed anyway. The second bite came easier. Halfway through, she realized her. Shoulders had straightened. Kelvin's voice came low, steady, meant only for her. That's it. Head high. For the first time in years, Ariel lifted her golden eyes and met the gaze of the square. And some of them looked away first. The storm rolled back in by evening, sheets of rain hammering against the tin roofs until the whole district seemed to shake under its weight. The alleys ran with water, neon signs bled light into the streams, and the air carried the metallic tang of wet rust. Inside Kelvin's quarters, the sound of the downpour softened into a low, steady rhythm that filled the silences between breaths. Ariel sat on the edge of the cot, his oversized shirt draped loose across her frame, her silver hair damp from their walk back. Her golden eyes flicked restlessly toward the door, then the table, then back to him. She was restless, but not from hunger or exhaustion. Something else pressed against her chest, heavier than fear, yet sharper than curiosity. Kelvin leaned against the wall by the table, arms crossed, boots planted firm. His green eyes never wavered, calm and unreadable, but his attention was fixed on her. He had said little since they returned. He didn't need to. Silence from him felt less like absence, and more like a wall solid, unshaken, giving her room to think whether she wanted it or not. Finally, her voice broke the quiet. "You gave me rules. You gave me choice. I've been waiting to see if it was a trick." Kelvin straightened a fraction, eyes steady. "It isn't." Her lips pressed together. A tremor ran through her. Old fear clawed at her throat. What if he changes tomorrow? What if his strength is only borrowed from him? What if he wants the same thing, only slower? But she forced the words out anyway. "Do you want me?" The question hung heavy in the small room. The rain hammered harder outside. Kelvin's jaw shifted, but his voice stayed level, blunt as steel. "I'm a man. Of course I want you." Heat climbed her chest, shame and relief twisting together. She waited for the weight that always followed, the demand, the claim. It didn't come. Kelvin didn't move toward her. He didn't reach, didn't press. His calm presence stayed fixed, leaving the choice in her hands. Her throat felt tight. "Then why haven't you?" "Because wanting isn't the same as taking," he said. His voice dipped lower now, quiet but firm. "You decide when." "Not me. Never as debt. Never because you're afraid. When you want it, or not at all." Ariel's heart pounded so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. She had never heard words like that spoken to her, not once in all the years of being owned. Desire had always been a weapon, a leash, a knife held against her skin. To hear it stripped of power and placed back in her hands unsettled her more than cruelty ever had. Slowly, as though testing both him and herself, she rose from the cot. Her legs trembled but held. She crossed the small room step by step until she stood in front of him. For a long moment she searched his face, looking for the hidden trap, a smirk that would ruin it. There was nothing, only steady green eyes waiting, patient as stone. Her breath shivered. She reached for his wrist, her fingers trembling, and guided his hand to her hip over the fabric of the shirt. The heat of his palm bled through the cloth, steady and strong. His fingers flexed once, then stilled, as if locked by sheer discipline. He didn't pull her closer. He didn't claim her. He waited. She whispered, her voice breaking. "I choose you." His jaw tightened, restraint flashing across his face, but his words came even. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, the word shaking but true. "Because it's mine to give." Kelvin exhaled slowly, a weight he had been carrying since the square easing from his shoulders. His other hand lifted to her face, rough thumb brushing the edge of her cheekbone. She leaned into the touch, eyes closing for the briefest second, then opening again with a fire she hadn't felt in years. He lowered his head and kissed her, not hurried, not claiming, but firm and deliberate. Her fingers fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, her breath catching with the shock of wanting without fear. The kiss deepened, her chest flooding with relief and need. And for the first time in years, the touch against her body was not a brand, not humiliation. It was chosen. When they broke apart, her forehead pressed against his. Her voice came in a whisper, barely louder than the rain. "Don't ever let me go back there." "You won't," Kelvin said, steady as stone. And when he lifted her into his arms and carried her back to the cot, she didn't resist. The rain had eased by midday, leaving the square slick with puddles that mirrored the fractured glow of neon. Traders shouted over each other, hawking fried scraps and rusted parts, the usual chaos of KTH-9 pushing back against the lull of the storm. But beneath the noise was a sharper edge, the kind that hummed whenever something had shifted in the balance of power. Whispers still moved through the crowd about the human who had lifted a woman from the mud days ago. Some dismissed it. Others carried the story like a spark, waiting to see where it would catch. Kelvin walked at his usual steady pace, boots splashing through shallow puddles, hands loose at his sides. He wasn't hurrying. He never hurried. The crowd parted for him without realizing why, some instinct recognizing the weight of discipline in his stride. Beside him, Ariel walked for the first time without her head bowed. The plain shirt and shorts he'd given her clung lightly to her frame. Sleeves rolled above her elbows. Her silver hair brushed, but still tangled at the ends. Her golden eyes stayed fixed forward, though her fingers twisted unconsciously at the fabric near her thighs. Every glance she caught from the crowd pressed against her like a weight. Some were quick and embarrassed. Others lingered sharp with judgment. The memory of mud and jeering laughter pressed against her ribs, her knees, itching with ghosts of bruises. Instinct begged her to drop her eyes, to fold, to disappear. But Kelvin's hand brushed lightly against the small of her back, not pushing, just steady, and his voice came low, meant only for her. Eyes forward. You don't owe them anything. She drew in a trembling breath and obeyed. Step by step, she kept her gaze level. They reached a food stall near the square's center, the same stall where humiliation had once been spectacle. The vendor froze when he saw them, remembering, uncertain, whether to serve or hide. Kelvin placed credits on the counter without hesitation. 2 bowls, he said flatly. The vendor obeyed, his hands moving quick, ladling broth and noodles. Ariel stood stiff at Kelvin's side, every nerve burning. Her body screamed at her to flee before the square closed in, before the laughter rose again. She felt the eyes on her waiting, daring her to fail. Kelvin lifted his bowl, sat calmly at the wet metal table, and looked at her. His voice carried quiet finality. Eat here, beside me. Her chest tightened. Her knuckles whitened around. The bowl, the chair stood there like a test she didn't know how to pass. She could feel whispers pricking at her back. She crawl. She always crawls. She forced 1 foot forward, then another. Her legs shook, but she lowered herself into the chair, bowl steady in her hands. Her knees wanted to collapse, but she kept them still. She lifted the spoon, her breath shallow, and took the first bite. Heat spread across her tongue, down her chest, and the square didn't erupt into laughter. It didn't break into mockery. The whispers lingered, but quieter now, their sharpness dulled by the calm weight of the man sitting next to her. Kelvin didn't speak until she was halfway through the bowl. His voice reached her, low and firm. That's it, head high. Something inside her shifted. Her spine straightened, shoulders rolling back. Her golden eyes swept the square, and for the first time she didn't look away. She met their stares, and some of them broke, first glancing down, turning away, confused by a defiance they hadn't expected to see in her. Then she felt it, the sharp burn of a gaze, like a blade. Her master leaned against a nearby stall, arms folded, a bitter sneer twisting his scarred jaw. His eyes bored into her, dripping with the memory of chains. Her chest clamped tight. The spoon shook in her hand. For a heartbeat her body betrayed her, legs twitching, ready to fold. Kelvin leaned slightly closer, his tone calm, unshaken. Keep walking. Her pulse thundered, but when she rose, she didn't falter. She set the empty bowl on the counter, stepped away from the chair, and walked with Kelvin at her side, past the food stall, past the place where she had once pressed her face to the mud, past the man who had owned her laughter, her hunger, her body. She walked upright, shin level, golden eyes steady. Her master's sneer wavered, faltered under. The silence of the square that no longer watched him but her. The woman who had refused to break Dot by the time they reached the edge of the market. Ariel's palms were damp, her legs trembling, her chest tight as if she had run a mile. But she hadn't knelt. She hadn't broken. She glanced at Kelvin, and he gave the smallest nod. The weight of it struck harder than applause. That night, curled under the blanket in his quarters, she whispered into the dimness, half to herself, half to him, "I am not property." "The chair," his voice answered, steady and sure. "You're Ariel." And for the first time, she believed it. The storm returned that night with a vengeance. Rain hammering against the rooftops of KTH-9 until the whole district shook under its weight. Lightning flared somewhere beyond the skyline, flashing across. Broken pipes and the veins of neon that bled light into the puddles. Inside Kelvin's quarters, the storm's roar softened into a low rhythm, steady enough to mask the sound of breath. Ariel sat at the edge of the cot, her hair damp from the walk back, the oversized shirt clinging to her frame. Her golden eyes flicked from the door to the table and back to Kelvin, who stood by the shelves aligning his tools with the same care. He gave to every motion. He was silent, calm, but his presence filled the room like stone. Her fingers tightened on the fabric at her thighs. For days she had tested him, waited for the hidden demand, the moment when kindness became claim. It never came. Tonight the tension that gripped her wasn't fear of chains, but the weight of choice pressing down for the first time in her life. "You gave me rules," she whispered into the storm's noise. "You gave me choice. I thought it was another trick. I thought you would change." Kelvin turned, eyes green and sharp in the lamplight. "And now?" Her lips trembled before she forced the words out. "Now, I think it isn't." The silence stretched thick, pressing against her chest, until she thought it might crush her. Old fear whispered in her ear, "What if he walks away? What if I'm not enough? What if this strength is only borrowed?" But she pushed to her feet anyway, legs shaking, each step across the room heavier than the square had been. She stopped in front of him, breath shivering, and reached for his wrist. Her fingers curled around the scars on his skin, guiding his hand to rest against her hip through the thin fabric of the shirt. The heat of his palm burned steady against her, not like fire, but like a forge controlled, anchored. "I choose you," she whispered. For the first time, Kelvin's jaw tightened with something beyond discipline. Desire flickered sharp across. His face, honest and unhidden, but bound by restraint. His voice came lower, roughened but steady. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she said, and this time the word carried no tremor. "Because it's mine to give." He exhaled once, the sound. Half relief, half surrender. His other hand rose to her face, thumb brushing the edge of her cheekbone. She leaned into the touch, eyes closing, and opening with something fierce. He lowered his head and kissed her, not hurried, not claiming, but firm, deliberate, carrying. The weight of her choice. Her breath caught, fingers clutching at his shirt as the kiss deepened. For the first time, want did not carry fear. For the first time, touch was not a cage but a door. When they broke apart, her forehead rested against his, her voice shaking with relief. "Don't ever let me go back there." "You won't," Kelvin said, steady as iron. He lifted her into his arms and carried her to the cot. She did not resist. She pressed her face into his neck, feeling the beat of his pulse, steady and strong, the sound of a man who would not break his word. He laid her down gently, and when she pulled him with her, his restraint broke, but not into taking, into answering, into touch that was chosen, not demanded. Hours later, the storm still raged. But inside, the silence was softer. Ariel lay curled against him, her golden eyes half closed, her voice raw but certain. "I am not property. I am Ariel. And I'm yours. Kelvin kissed her hair, voice low and final. And I'm yours. Outside, the gutters overflowed, neon flickering against the water, washing the colony's filth into the dark. Inside, two figures lay against the dim light, steady in the quiet certainty of something neither chains nor fear could erase. No more kneeling, no more mud. Only dignity, trust, and a bond chosen together.